Black woman fired for helping a veteran's dog. What happened next shocked everyone. They fired a black woman. Not for doing something wrong, but for doing something right. She stood up for a veteran with a service dog and lost everything. But what happened next? It shook an entire military base and made the whole town remember her name. This is the story they tried to bury, but now you're going to hear it. The black woman they didn't notice but could never forget. They saw her pour coffee. What they didn't see was the war she fought quietly every single day. Angela Brooks wasn't famous. She didn't have a title in front of her name. But if you stepped inside her cafe even once, you'd never forget her. She was the kind of woman this world often overlooked. Black, soft-spoken, wearing jeans faded from years of hard work. Her hair was coiled tight, wrapped in a simple scarf that smelled like cinnamon and sunshine. But there was something in her presence that made you slow down, made you pay attention. Like you were standing in front of someone sacred, even if you didn't know why. She ran a little place called Freedom Grounds Cafe, tucked off the main drag in Wilkesboro, Georgia. A town where time moved slow, where porch flags never lowered, and history still walked around in people's attitudes. It was a place where black women were expected to serve, but not to lead. And yet there she was, owning, not renting. Running the cafe without apology, serving veterans, mothers, lost souls, and wanderers. Her cafe didn't sell lattes with caramel foam. It sold safety, a space to breathe. The walls inside were lined with faces, not of celebrities but soldiers. Black soldiers, smiling in uniforms, crying in silence. Some gone, some forgotten. But here they lived again. At the center of that space stood Angela. Always moving, always listening, always knowing when to pour another cup and when to say nothing at all. Her husband, Marcus Brooks, had once worn the uniform too. A staff sergeant in the army, sent home in a box draped in a flag. An IED had taken him from her in Kandahar. What the military didn't realize was that they hadn't just buried a man, they'd buried her entire map for the future. She didn't remarry, didn't leave town. Instead, she stayed and turned her grief into a mission. Every Wednesday at 9 a.m., she hosted Veterans Hour. It wasn't advertised. No sign on the door, but the regulars knew. If you wore a uniform once, whether in Vietnam, Iraq, or somewhere forgotten in between, Angela would remember your name, your story, and exactly how you liked your coffee. No speeches, no pity, just presence. That morning started like any other. Sunlight crept through the blinds in soft stripes. The coffee was already on by 6:45, the aroma curling like prayer. Angela moved through the shop with practiced ease, setting out clean mugs, wiping down the table near the window, the one some called Marcus's seat, though no one ever dared sit there. Outside, the street was still. Inside, the cafe began to hum with life. Ms. Liu came in first, retired Army nurse, cane tapping with rhythm. Then came Thomas, Navy man with a voice like gravel and hands that trembled when he poured sugar. Angela greeted each of them like family. A nod, a touch to the elbow, no big show, just care. The bell above the door chimed again at 8:56 a.m. Angela glanced up, then froze for a heartbeat. There he was, Ray McMillan. He wasn't like the others. He didn't laugh much, didn't stay long, but he came, and that meant something. Ray was a black man in his late 50s. His walk still carried that Marine Corps discipline. His jacket was regulation green, worn thin at the cuffs. But his eyes, those eyes were tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something heavier than memory. And beside him, Shadow, a black and tan German shepherd, alert and quiet, wearing a bright red vest that read, "Service Dog." "Do not pet." Angela didn't hesitate. She gave him a soft smile, subtle as sunrise. "Corner's open," she said. "Coffee's hot." Ray nodded, said nothing, and made his way to the far booth. Shadow stayed glued to his side, eyes sweeping the cafe like they'd done it 100 times before. Angela poured the coffee. Her hands were steady, but the air in the room had shifted. Something unspoken lingered at the edges. And outside, parked just across the street, a car door slammed shut. Angela didn't know it yet, but what was about to walk through that door would change everything. She refused to remove the black veteran and paid the price. The moment he saw the dog, everything shifted. But what really bothered him wasn't the dog. It was who the dog belonged to. Angela Brooks stood behind the counter, polishing a mug when the door swung open. A blast of cold air followed the man in a navy blazer and thin-rimmed glasses as he stepped inside. Clipboard pressed tight to his chest. His shoes barely made a sound, but the tension that followed him was loud. Logan Prescott, state health inspector. He didn't smile, didn't greet anyone, just glanced around the cafe like he was searching for a problem. Angela's voice was calm. "Can I help you with something?" "Routine inspection," he said, already moving. His tone wasn't rude, it was worse, clinical, distant, like Angela didn't even exist. He walked past the counter, opened the fridge without asking, checked labels, ran fingers along stainless steel like he was tracing for dust. Every motion was tight, efficient, practiced. But his eyes kept darting, scanning the room until they landed on Ray McMillan, and more specifically, the dog at his feet. Prescott froze mid-step. "That animal can't be here." His voice wasn't loud, but it cracked the room in half. Heads turned, conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered over plates, even the ceiling fan seemed to slow. Angela looked up, meeting his eyes. "He's a service animal," she said gently. "That's Mr. McMillan's dog, Shadow. He's a Marine. The dog's registered under ADA guidelines." Prescott didn't blink. "I don't care what badge that dog's wearing. This is a health violation, animals in a food environment. That's a hazard, dander, hair, saliva. He needs to go." Angela stepped around the counter. "Sir, with respect, service dogs are not considered pets. Federal law makes it clear. This is legal. You can check the code if you'd like." Prescott's tone sharpened. "I've read the code. Have you read the closure policy for non-compliance?" At the booth, Ray sat still as stone. Shadow didn't move. But the tension in Ray's shoulders said more than any words could. His eyes were fixed on the table. Not because he was afraid, but because this wasn't new. He'd been here before, not this cafe, not this town, but this moment. The kind where people acted like you didn't belong, like your presence was a threat. Like your skin canceled out your sacrifice. Angela took a slow breath. "I'm not asking him to leave, and I'm not asking his dog to leave either." "You're making a mistake," Prescott warned. "No," she said quietly, "I'm making a stand." The silence that followed was dense, full of unspoken agreement from the room. Veterans nodded. One elderly man whispered, "That's right." Lena, the young barista behind the counter, froze mid-pour, her hands trembling just slightly. And then a new voice entered the room. Angela Brooks. Deborah Lyall had arrived. The regional manager, white, impeccably dressed. Her heels clicked like punctuation on tile. She held a leather folder and a look that made clear she was not here to talk. "I just walked in and witnessed a direct violation of corporate health policy," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "and a refusal to follow the inspector's directive." Angela turned to her, calm, straight. "He's a veteran, that dog is his lifeline. You really want to be the one to throw him out." Deborah's expression didn't change. "I want you to pack your things. You're fired, effective immediately." The words felt sharp. Final, like a door slamming shut. Ray shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened, Shadow's ears twitched. Angela didn't cry, didn't protest. She looked around at her cafe, at the people she served, at the photo of Marcus on the wall. She walked behind the counter, untied her apron, folded it slowly, and placed it down. She turned to Lena. "Make sure Mr. Macmillan gets his refill." Then she walked to the door. No one moved, not the veterans, not the barista, not the man with the clipboard. Angela stepped into the sunlight without looking back. But someone, quietly, without a word, had pulled out their phone and recorded the moment a black woman lost her job for refusing to betray the dignity of a black Marine. Outside, the town kept moving. But inside that cafe, a storm had just been born. A black woman's honor sparked a military response. They fired a black woman for protecting a veteran. The next morning, 4 Humvees pulled up, and the town would never forget what followed. The cafe was quiet, not just hushed, but still. Lena stood behind the counter, hands trembling as she poured a refill into Ray's mug. No one said much. No one moved fast. It was as if something sacred had been broken, and no one knew how to put it back together. Ray hadn't touched his coffee since Angela left. He just sat there, eyes locked on the window. Shadow lay beneath him, ears perked, breathing slow and steady, like he was waiting for a sound the rest of them couldn't hear. Outside, the Georgia sky was bruised with early morning mist, and from the far end of Main Street, a low rumble stirred the air. Lena looked up. The coffee in the mugs rippled. Then came the sound. Heavy tires, diesel engines, rhythmic. Intentional. 4 military Humvees emerged from the fog, crawling slowly through the heart of town like a convoy from a memory. Their presence was impossible to ignore. The paint was matte green, their bodies tall and broad, built to intimidate. Onlookers paused on sidewalks. Some whispered, others froze. The lead vehicle stopped directly in front of Freedom Grounds. The cafe door didn't swing open immediately. It waited. Then it jingled just once. And in stepped Colonel Richard Gaines. Full-dress blues, buttons gleaming like medals of memory. Black skin smooth but worn, eyes sharp and posture carved from discipline. He walked with the weight of command but carried it like something earned, not demanded. He stopped in the center of the cafe, not a word spoken yet. Lena gasped softly. Ray stood up slowly, stiff. Their eyes met. And then Ray did something no one had ever seen him do. He raised his hand to his brow and saluted. Colonel Gaines returned it, crisp, precise, and full of history. Then his voice cut the silence. "Where is Angela Brooks?" Lena swallowed. She was fired yesterday for standing up for Mr. Macmillan and his dog. Colonel Gaines nodded once. His jaw tightened. That woman served the families of this base better than most agencies ever did. When my men came home broken and silent, she gave them a place to be human again. He looked directly at Logan Prescott, who was now standing awkwardly near the pastry case, his clipboard dangling at his side. "You don't have to know someone's rank to treat them with dignity," the colonel said. Deborah Lyall, the corporate manager, stepped forward, flustered. "Colonel Gaines, with all due respect, this is a private business." He turned to her with a calm force. "You made your decision," he said. "Now we'll make ours." He raised one gloved hand. Outside, 2 Marines entered the cafe with reverence, not noise. One of them climbed behind the counter and carefully removed the corporate logo from the wall, peeling it like old skin. The other carried a new sign, hand-painted, bold white letters on smooth wood. "Welcome to Angela's house, where honor is served daily." They mounted it beneath Marcus's photo. The veterans inside didn't clap. They didn't need to. One by one, they stood, quietly, like soldiers rising when a general enters the room. But today, the general wasn't in uniform. She wasn't even in the building. She was at home, still in the cafe clothes she wore the day before. Sitting in her truck, engine off. The letter in her hand came sealed in an envelope from Fort Braxton. Lena's voice had been shaky on the voicemail. "They want to talk to you in person." Angela didn't rush, she didn't smile. She just stared at the steering wheel, then at the road ahead. Her hands gripped the letter like it weighed more than paper. Across town, Colonel Gaines stood in the cafe she built and said, loud enough for the world to hear, "She didn't fight wars. She healed warriors, and today that counts for something." By noon, the video had reached 1 million views. A black woman had been punished for her humanity. Now her community, especially the ones who wore uniforms, was about to lift her higher than any corporate ladder ever could. Angela Brooks didn't know it yet, but she was no longer just a cafe owner. She was about to become a commander of something far more powerful than coffee. She was being summoned to lead healing. She lost her job for kindness, then was asked to lead healing. The woman they fired for showing humanity was now being offered the one thing she was never given before: authority. Angela Brooks sat in her truck, hands wrapped around the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding her together. She was still wearing her cafe jeans, stained with yesterday's coffee, and her favorite flannel shirt, the one with the frayed cuff Marcus used to tug on when he teased her. The sun climbed slow through the windshield, casting long, golden lines across the dashboard. She hadn't started the engine yet. In her lap lay a printed message, official seal pressed into the top corner. From Fort Braxton headquarters. Subject, request for meeting, Colonel Richard Gaines. She stared at it, then looked up at the road ahead. It was a path she'd driven hundreds of times before, but never like this. Angela took one deep breath, turned the key, and let the old truck rumble to life. At the gate, the soldier checking IDs did a double take. "Ma'am, are you Miss Brooks?" Angela nodded, unsure whether to smile. "They're expecting you," he said softly. "Colonel's orders." She drove past the checkpoint, down a row of flag-lined sidewalks and barracks shaded by towering oak trees. The base hummed with order, cadence calls in the distance, boots striking pavement in perfect rhythm. But the building she stopped at looked different. A single-level structure with wide windows and no signage yet. New paint, new floors. But unfinished, like something waiting to be filled. Colonel Gaines met her at the entrance. This time, no dress blues, just a khaki uniform and the calm of a man who'd seen storms and still believed in clear skies. He opened the door for her. "Thank you for coming." Angela stepped in. The place smelled of fresh drywall and something older, possibility. "What is this?" she asked. He led her down a quiet hallway, past old campaign maps, past portraits of fallen soldiers. They stopped in front of a room labeled Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative. Inside, the space was wide open. Foldable chairs stacked along the walls, empty bulletin boards, a coffee pot in the corner unplugged. Two young staffers unpacked boxes of donated supplies, hand weights, therapy mats, notebooks. Gaines turned to her. "We've been trying to get this off the ground for 2 years," he said. "The problem isn't funding, the problem is heart. We've got the paperwork, what we don't have is you." Angela blinked. "I'm not a therapist," she said. "I don't have credentials." He didn't flinch. "But you had something no degree can teach. You ran a place where men who had nothing left could sit in silence and feel seen. You built a sanctuary with coffee and memory." Angela folded her arms, unsure. The emotion still raw, still loud. "I don't even know if I belong in this kind of space." "You already built one," he said. "We're just giving you more room." From the back of the room came a voice. "Is that her?" Angela turned. A young black woman stepped forward, her sleeves pulled over burn scars on her forearms. Late 20s, thin, careful with every step. A golden retriever puppy walked beside her in training gear, tail wagging gently. Her name tag read, Tiffany Rios. She smiled shyly. I saw the video. You didn't flinch. You just stood there. I haven't been inside a cafe since I got back. But if it's a place you run, I think I could try. Angela's throat tightened. She looked at Gaines. What exactly are you offering me? He handed her a folder. Director, this place. Full authority to build it how you see fit. Run programs, train staff, shape the culture. You don't have to follow a model. You are the model. Angela looked around the room, bare walls, unspoken stories. She thought of Ray, of Shadow, of Lena standing tall when everyone else froze, of Marcus. She nodded slowly. I'll do it. Colonel Gaines smiled, warm and firm. Then let's get to work. Over the next few weeks, the space began to change. Not with furniture, but with feeling. Angela brought in what no one else could: consistency, warmth, truth. She posted a whiteboard by the coffee station. Who needs a ride? Who needs a listener? She didn't ask veterans to talk. She simply sat near them, cup in hand, and waited. Dogs were welcomed without question. Silent moments weren't filled with noise, but with presence. One afternoon, she brought in the old bulletin board from the cafe, still pinned with thank you notes and scribbled prayers. It smelled like cinnamon and old stories. Ray came bi-weekly now. Shadow walked straight to a corner and laid down like he belonged there. Tiffany showed up every Tuesday. She didn't join group sessions yet, but she started sketching. Hands, dogs, homecomings. Angela didn't push, she simply remembered. By the end of the month, the place had a rhythm. Not fast, not loud, but real, and word was spreading. Some people questioned why a woman with no formal mental health degree was being trusted to run a federal program. Auditors came in, suits and skepticism. They asked questions, tested the water filters, stared too long at her shoes. One of them, a white man in a pressed tie, finally asked, "What certifications do you hold that qualify you to counsel veterans?" Angela looked him in the eye. "I don't hold certifications," she said. "I hold names, I hold pain, I hold space." He didn't reply, just took notes. A week later, Colonel Gaines called her into his office. He handed her a memo. The Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative was being reviewed for expansion as a national model. Angela didn't cheer. She just whispered, "Let's make sure it stays human." Because now, for the first time in her life, she wasn't just keeping the door open. She was building the house. She was erased for being kind. Now her name hangs in stone. They erased her from a payroll. Now her name is carved on the walls of healing. 6 months passed, and the building Angela once walked into with trembling hands now pulsed with quiet life. Not with therapy sessions or official jargon, but with laughter in the kitchen, long silences shared in the garden, and the low rhythm of hope returning, slow and steady. The community had stopped calling it a facility. They called it Angela's house now, even on maps. Outside, a new bronze plaque stood beneath the flagpole in honor of Angela Brooks, for seeing what others ignored, for serving without armor, for staying when others turned away. Angela would blush every time she passed it. But deep down, she knew that story wasn't hers alone. It belonged to Ray, to Tiffany, to Lena, to every man and woman who once sat in Freedom Grounds Cafe with nothing but a quiet ache and walked away feeling human again. But then came the letter, from the same corporate office that once fired her. Angela sat at her desk when she opened it, same spot she now kept decorated with photos of Marcus, her father in his Navy uniform, and a drawing Tiffany had made of Shadow curled beside a coffee mug. She read the first line twice. "Dear Ms. Brooks." We write today to apologize. Angela leaned back, stunned. The letter went on. The video of her standing beside Ray had sparked national outrage. The board had issued a formal apology for the decision made by Deborah Lyall, who was now no longer affiliated with the company. They even offered to reinstate Angela and grant her full franchise ownership of the cafe location. Angela set the letter down and stared at it in silence. Later that evening, she walked back to Freedom Grounds. It had reopened under a new name, the Grounded Table. Different owners, same layout. Lena had returned as manager. The windows still let in the afternoon sun just right, but something had changed. Angela walked to the corner booth where Ray used to sit. She rested a hand on the worn wood. Lena brought her a cup just the way she liked it. Cinnamon on top. "You gonna take their offer?" she asked gently. Angela smiled. "No, this town doesn't need another coffee shop. It needs a place that remembers, and we already built that." That night, she stood outside Angela's house with Colonel Gaines, watching Tiffany help a new group of female vets settle into their first group session. "She's running Tuesday nights now," Angela said, proud. "She's becoming you," Gaines replied. Angela shook her head slowly. "No, she's becoming her. That's what this place does." The wind rustled through the flag above them. The stars looked closer than they had in years. Back inside, someone was playing soft piano chords, unfamiliar, unpolished. But it filled the hallway like home. On the back wall, next to the mission statement, hung a framed photo of Angela at Freedom Grounds, arms crossed, apron dusted with flour, smiling as if she had no idea what was coming. Underneath it was a simple quote in engraved brass. "Compassion is not a weakness. It is a revolution in slow motion." People still came from far away to see the woman who was fired for letting a black veteran and his dog sit in peace. But by now they understood. She wasn't just a woman who ran a cafe. She was a builder of sanctuaries, a keeper of names, a quiet warrior in denim and faith. And while the world once tried to silence her with dismissal, Angela Brooks had responded by creating a space so loud with love. It echoed far beyond the walls they once told her she didn't belong in. Sometimes the loudest revolutions begin with the quietest acts of kindness. Angela didn't carry a protest sign or wear a badge of power. She simply chose to see someone others ignored and refused to look away. Her story reminds us that compassion is courage, that when the world pushes people to the margins, it takes one brave soul to draw them back into the center. And sometimes, that one act of grace can shake an entire system. If this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or even feel seen, leave us a comment below and share what part touched you most. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you believe more people should hear stories like Angela's, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us on this journey. Because in the videos ahead, we'll be uncovering more real, powerful, and untold stories. Stories of injustice, of resilience, and of Black excellence that will challenge what you thought you knew. Stories that will inspire, stir your heart, and stay with you. We're just getting started. See you in the next one.